Today we're diving into the unbelievable stories of 5 people who defied death in the most astonishing ways. These are tales of pure luck, moments where survival seemed absolutely impossible, and yet they made it out alive. So let's get right into it. Number 1. On a freezing winter night in December 1980, 19-year-old Jean Hilliard was driving through rural Minnesota when her car skidded off an icy road. Stranded and desperate for help, she decided to walk to a nearby friend's house, about 2 miles away. With temperatures plummeting to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, Jean was fighting against the clock. Minnesota winters are brutal, and without proper gear, the cold can quickly become deadly. Jean made it close to her friend's house before she collapsed, exhausted by the long walk in the relentless cold, and lost consciousness. Her friend, Wally Nelson, found her the next morning, describing her body as stiff and frozen like a log. Jean's face was ashen white, and her limbs were so stiff that Wally had to load her into his car like a piece of wood. When she arrived at the hospital, doctors couldn't even register a pulse. Her body temperature was too low to measure with a thermometer, and her skin was too hard for a needle to penetrate. The medical team assumed she was dead, but they slowly began to warm her up, just to see what would happen. Miraculously, after 2 hours of warming, Jean's heart began to beat faintly. Her body started to thaw, and eventually she regained consciousness. Jean had a full recovery, with no lasting brain damage or frostbite, despite her prolonged exposure to such extreme cold. To this day, no one can explain how she survived being frozen solid for 6 hours. Number 2. Imagine free-falling from 15,000 feet, knowing your parachute has failed. That's the nightmare that experienced skydiver Michael Holmes lived through in 2006. Holmes, who had completed more than 7,000 jumps, was confident in the air. But on that day, everything went wrong. As he jumped out of the plane above Lake Taupo in New Zealand and reached for his main parachute cord, nothing happened. He quickly deployed his reserve chute, but it malfunctioned too, twisting around itself and failing to open properly. Holmes desperately tried to untangle the chute as the ground raced up to meet him at over 100 miles per hour. He knew his chances of survival were next to none, but fate had other plans. Amazingly, when he hit the ground at terminal velocity, his fall was cushioned by thick vegetation, which absorbed enough of the impact to save his life. Holmes survived the crash with only a collapsed lung and a broken ankle. Number 3. Speaking of people who survived incredible falls, here is the story of Juliane Koepcke. On Christmas Eve, 1971, 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke was aboard Lanza Flight 508, flying over the Peruvian rainforest. The flight was supposed to be routine, but just 25 minutes after takeoff, disaster struck. The plane flew into a severe thunderstorm and lightning hit one of the fuel tanks, causing the aircraft to disintegrate mid-air. Juliane, still strapped to her seat, plummeted 10,000 feet to the ground. She was the only survivor of the crash, and the fact that she lived through the fall was nothing short of a miracle. Experts believe that the row of seats she was attached to spun like a leaf in the wind, slowing her fall just enough, while the thick jungle canopy further cushioned the impact. But Juliane's survival in the fall was just the beginning of her ordeal. She had a broken collarbone, deep cuts on her right arm, and one of her eyes was swollen shut. On top of all this, she was stranded in the Amazon rainforest, one of the most hostile environments on Earth. With no food, no shelter, and no way to contact help, she had to rely on her instincts to stay alive. For 11 days, Juliane wandered through the jungle, drinking water from streams and eating small pieces of candy she had salvaged from the wreckage. Her father, a biologist, had taught her some basic survival skills, and she knew that following the water would eventually lead her to civilization. On the 11th day, she found the encampment of some local lumberjacks, who treated her wounds as best they could and then took her to safety. Number 4. If you thought being struck by lightning once was unlucky, meet Roy Sullivan. Over a period of 35 years, this park ranger was struck by lightning not once, not twice, but 7 times, and lived to tell the tale. Roy's first encounter with lightning happened in 1942, when he was in a fire lookout tower in Shenandoah National Park. The tower had no lightning rod, and when a storm rolled in, lightning struck the building. The lightning strike set the building on fire, so Roy had to run out of the burning tower. But as soon as he was outside, he was struck by lightning himself. Luckily, he survived the ordeal, but that was just the beginning. In July 1969, while driving his truck through the park, lightning struck again, this time hitting a tree and bouncing into the vehicle through an open window. The current burned off his eyebrows, set his hair on fire, and knocked him unconscious. Luckily, the uncontrolled vehicle stopped just before the edge of a cliff. Almost exactly 1 year later, Roy was struck while standing in his front yard after lightning hit a nearby power transformer and then jumped to his left shoulder. Another incident occurred in the spring of 1972. Roy was working in the park near a ranger station when he was struck for a fourth time. His hair caught fire once again. Roy had to run to the restroom inside the ranger station to douse the flames with water. At this point, Roy had started to become fearful of lightning storms and carried a can of water in his truck at all times, just in case his hair caught fire again. By now, he had become known as the human lightning rod, and people began to joke that he should avoid storms at all costs. But the lightning had other plans. In August 1973, Roy saw a storm approaching, and while he tried to escape it by driving away, the moment he walked out of his truck, lightning struck him once more. Roy described seeing the lightning moving down his left arm and leg, and then crossing over to his right leg. His hair was set on fire for the third time, but at least he was now well prepared. He crawled back to his truck and poured the can of water over his head. Roy was struck 2 more times, once in 1976 and the other in 1977. The first time while walking outdoor, and the second time while fishing. Both times his hair caught fire. The odds of surviving not 1 but 7 lightning strikes are obviously extremely low. While Roy Sullivan's body may have been a literal lightning rod, his luck at escaping death time and time again is what truly makes his story extraordinary. Something that earned him a place in the Guinness World Records. Number 5. Surviving 1 atomic bomb is beyond the realm of most people's imagination, but Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived 2. On August 6, 1945, Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip for his employer, Mitsubishi, when the first atomic bomb was dropped on the city. Yamaguchi was about 2 miles from ground zero. The blast threw him into the air, ruptured his eardrums, and left him with serious burns on the left side of his body. But somehow he survived and managed to make the journey back to his hometown, Nagasaki. Just 3 days later, on August 9th, Yamaguchi was at work in Nagasaki, recounting the horrors he had witnessed in Hiroshima when the second atomic bomb was dropped. Once again, he was about 2 miles from the epicenter, and once again he survived. The blast caused him to suffer further radiation exposure, but Yamaguchi lived through both of the most destructive bombings in human history. Yamaguchi is one of the very few people officially recognized as a double hibakusha, a survivor of both atomic bombings. Yamaguchi lived on to have 3 children, became a vocal proponent of nuclear disarmament, and eventually died in 2010 at the age of 93. These 5 people defied impossible odds and lived through events that should have been fatal. Their stories are not just about survival, they're about the moments where chance, fate, and sheer luck collide to create the unexplainable. Which story do you think is most incredible? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe with all notifications on so that you won't miss any of our future episodes. Thanks for watching, and until next time.